Welcome back. The opioid crisis in full focus at the White House today, where the president's Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and Opioids will meet. This coming after New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, the commission's head, called on the president to officially declare the crisis a national emergency. Opiant Pharmaceuticals CEO Dr. Roger Crystal is expected to testify later today in front of President Trump's commission. He joins us right now. Before that, good to see you, sir. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
What are you expecting today? An average of 91 Americans die every day from an opioid-related overdose, according to the Centers for Disease Control. What do you want to hear from the White House today, and tell us what you're expecting?
Well, thank you. We are testifying, amongst other industry leaders, in front of Governor Christie and his commission. It's really for us to have the opportunity to provide our thoughts on this crisis. For us, it's very important that the government, this country, really recognizes opioid addiction as a disease. And that's a really important starting point when we consider how we can then offer better treatment for these thousands of patients every year who are dying from this.
How did this happen? I mean, tell me how this became as big of a crisis as it is.
I think that, like many crises, there's several contributing factors. For me and my background as a surgeon, I would say the main factor, however, is the overprescribing of opioid medication. It's quite interesting that here in this country, typically we would start by providing an opioid painkiller for any type of pain, and then considering where to go next. My experience as a surgeon, typically a patient with pain, I would perhaps provide acetaminophen, ibuprofen, and then work up the pain ladder and providing an opioid painkiller much later on in a patient's condition. So
it's doctors prescribing too many drugs?
It's a combination of how we in this country are used to prescribing opioids, in combination perhaps with some of the marketing tactics in the past. And so these types of features are what we've seen get to this crisis.
You know, as I chair a group, the American Conservative Union, that spends a lot of time looking at the impact of this addiction on families, some people argue there's a moral component to this, which played into the election of 2016, kind of a malaise out there across America where people just feel like they feel hopeless. Do you think there's a moral component to this idea of drug addiction as well?
Whereby people
they're giving up hope. They just feel like, you know, they don't feel positive about their life. They don't feel like they have good economic prospects.
I mean, that's difficult to know with the data we have as a company, as a pharmaceutical company, certainly. I'm sure for many people that perhaps is absolutely an issue. I think once we recognize addiction as a disease, though, then there's less blame or perhaps consideration for people that it's their fault. Yeah. And through that way, we can start offering proper medical treatment. And as a company, we're absolutely committed, not just for the success we've had with the development of the Narcan nasal spray, which is saving lives, but also to go upstream of an overdose situation and then actually treat the condition more broadly. And
how does Opiant fit into this? You run a pharmaceutical company. Yes. Tell us what your role is in this crisis that we're talking about.
We are a dedicated addiction pharmaceutical company. So we started by developing this Narcan nasal spray, which saves patients' lives should they overdose from an opioid. Essentially, when that happens, you stop breathing, and the way of saving a life is to deliver naloxone as quickly as possible. And the Narcan nasal spray contains naloxone. It can be used by anybody. We have licensed it to another pharmaceutical company called Adapt Pharma, and that's being distributed throughout the United States.
Where are you finding the crisis is hitting most? We're at the Wall Street Journal writing a lot about rural America and the problems hitting so many rural and post-manufacturing communities. Is that where you're seeing your business grow?
Well, we both asked the same question, basically. So where the malaise is.
Well, I think what we see is, firstly, 80% of the U.S. landmass is rural, so by proportion, yes, absolutely. But however, opioid addiction is as much a disease of soccer mums as it is the areas in rural America, and we see opioid abuse just more widespread than the populations perhaps we would typically have considered. And with that in mind, being able to offer access to medical treatment for everybody concerned is absolutely critical.
Doctor, in terms of those nose sprays, I mean, you said that the knock on nose sprays because of what's in the nose spray. I mean, should people be worried when buying a nose spray?
Well, the compound in the Narcan nasal spray is naloxone. That is not addictive at all. This is a class of drug called an opioid antagonist. So this cannot be abused. It counteracts the effects of opioids. And in fact, as a company, we're committed to using opioid antagonists as a nasal spray, not just for the overdose situation. We have a product in development, for example, for alcohol use disorder, where patients will deliver nasally another opioid antagonist called naltrexone at the time when they want to drink. And the way it's working there is that patients, it will block the rewards from alcohol they might otherwise experience. And we think that's a really compelling way of potentially combating that addiction.
Incredible. That's very interesting. Doctor, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dr. Roger Crystal joining us here from Opiant.